All right, taking a quick look here at Downfall, Conquest of the Third Reich from GMT. I am maybe about halfway, a little more than halfway through the second turn of the game, and that's the full campaign. So the second turn, as you can see, is March to June 1943. I'm in the mud phase of the weather, which this system around this game is kind of fascinating. I would consider it to be fairly elegant. I mean, it's definitely a game or a gaming system rather than a simulation in any sense. Just because, first of all, it's at a strategic level, things are heavily abstracted. The combat system uses pips on your counters, much like a block game would. You can see those dots. You rotate your counters based on the strength points that your units have. So, you're not dealing with a lot of detail in terms of strength points, and even the unit types are all pretty abstracted as well. I mean, you've got basic infantry, mechanized infantry, armor, and then various fortress and garrison type troops. You do have some naval action as well. You've got fleets that are on the map. They are all largely there to serve the function of these strategic war tracks, which kind of abstract out the naval war as well as the strategic bombing campaign. So that's tracked up there. Battle for the Atlantic is there, and that's basically your sub convoy, your sub interceptions of Allied convoys. And then the Siege of Malta has to do with the control of the Mediterranean and the North African and eventually Italian and Overlord campaigns, your naval invasions. So I have not started the naval invasion phase of the war yet. I was still fighting in North Africa here. And you can see we're down to the last German unit in North Africa. I was able to utilize a card. There are cards in the game, but it's not what I would call a card-driven game. The cards are just there to provide some occasional capabilities or bonuses to your various combats and movements and things like that. So I was able to evacuate a elite German unit there, the 5th Panzer. The little star means they're elite. I was able to evacuate them out from Tunis using a card that allowed me to do it without them getting intercepted because, as you can see here, the Siege of Malta has this inactive, which means the Allies have won it, so all that's left is a single Italian fleet marker, which means that they're pretty badly outnumbered by the British fleet in the Mediterranean. So trying to move troops across that sea would be problematic, meaning that not only would that Italian fleet get interdicted, but then you would potentially lose steps, however many steps you were trying to transport. Given that I know from this angle it looks like there's 3 pips on there, but it's actually the OKW forces, which are the dark gray German forces, are set to use the other side of the board. So they're facing towards the camera in this case. So all of their units, you should read whatever's on the bottom of their units as the correct. So basically when I'm playing this solo, I just walk around to the other side of the table. Each time I'm going to do a Soviet or an OKW action. And so from the other side of the board, all of their units are right side up, and vice versa for the green and tan Western Allied units, as well as the light gray OKH and assorted minor allies, German units. They're all right side up from this side of the board. So yeah, it could be confusing, but I suspect if you're playing an opposed, everybody would be fine with it. I haven't had any issues remembering, who should be facing which way in terms of reading unit strengths and that. And that's playing solo, so I suspect playing it opposed would be just fine. But anyway, so I was able to evacuate one of the elite units from North Africa. The Africa Corps, alas, is trapped there. They were a little stronger, but they weren't elite, so I figured it would be better off to save the elite unit because I only had the card only allowed me to move one unit from a friendly port without interception. So unless I got another one of those cards to try and get the Africa Corps out, they're not getting out because they would just get intercepted and destroyed by the British fleet if they tried to do it without the benefit of the card. So, yeah, they will probably be destroyed. I figured they would be there too long. The Allies would eventually attack them and destroy them before I could even get them out anyway. So I just moved them in to try and make them as hard to take out as possible for the Allied forces. So, in terms of the rest of the war, obviously, Western Europe has not been invaded yet. In fact, the Allies don't really have any units to do anything with. Over here in their force pool is all the stuff that's going to come on once the High Command card comes out. So actual useful Allied troops besides what's in North Africa won't even be available until later in the turn. Because right now, all I've got there is a couple of single point strength detachments. There's nothing in the US right now, so this is it in terms of, military units that have any amount of strength. I moved one of the detachments down here already just to have some American troops present, but otherwise it's all British and Canadian troops here in North Africa, in addition to some kind of weak Australian troops over here. So that's where Western Europe is at. Over here on the East Front, you can see the Germans have been pushed back from the Caucasus where they start and from Stalingrad where they start. I just had them retreat back to the, whatever this river is here, to kind of make the Donets River, to make sort of a defensive line along the river without giving up, too many other victory point locations, which are the red hexes, the hexes with red borders. So obviously they have given up Stalingrad at this point, and I don't know if I need to put a control marker out there or not. I forget how it goes. For that, I think if the flag is there, you don't need a control marker because that indicates that if there's nothing there, then that power controls it. So, and then they have been pushed back a little bit from Leningrad. I kind of retreated them as well. One thing that the game doesn't really take into account, which is kind of important if you're a stickler for history. Obviously, Hitler said you can't retreat from Stalingrad. He said, you can't retreat at all. There'll be no retreating. But this game doesn't allocate for Hitler's influence on the war whatsoever. So you can do whatever you want as the German player on either side, whether you're the OKH or the OKW. And I didn't mention this at the beginning of the video, but the premise of this game, the design of it, is that it's a two-player game, but each player controls an Allied faction and each player controls a German faction. And so the one player controls the Western Allies, Britain and the United States, and the Free French, as well as the East Front German Command, or OKH. The other player controls the Soviets and the OKW, or Western German units, and you are, playing to see who can get to Berlin first. So as the Allied player, obviously you want to try and get the Allies into Western Europe as soon as possible while delaying the Soviets for as long as possible. So then the Western Allies would win. Whereas if you're playing the other side, you want to prevent the Allies from getting to Berlin so that you can get there faster with the Soviets. Or, not necessarily just get to Berlin, but control the most number of red bordered hexes in Europe to try and get victory. So it's an interesting system in that, you're each controlling a Allied side and a German side. So, and it is fascinating. Again, the way the system's designed, I'm finding very, I don't know, kind of like one more turn type of play. Everything's done by giving your particular faction orders, which come off of this order track. So it's a chit pull essentially. And there's this track that runs around the outside of the board. This is the initiative track, and each faction has a counter that moves along there, and whichever counter is last on the initiative track is the one that has initiative for that particular round. And different orders cost a different amount of initiative. So some orders, like a simple move order, costs very little initiative. Other things like reinforcements, adding infantry or armor steps to your units, can cost up to 20 odd initiative spaces. So you're sacrificing a lot to increase your forces in terms of your ability to go ahead of your opponent. You'll see the event markers along there. When that faction's particular initiative marker crosses that event space, then these cards down here, the event cards, are cycled through this process of a discard pile, an active event, and the forthcoming impending event. These will also control who has air power on the map at any given time, and so as it cycles through, your air power will adjust and change accordingly based on those cards. And the cards themselves provide various benefits based on historical things that happened. So in practice, it's worked really well. The chit draw for orders, you have the ability to bank orders in these planning spaces, which are these here. If it's something you're not particularly ready to implement, so you can try and game out based on what shows up on the track here, and you're supposed to take the lowest thing available for your faction, but if you want to grab something that's higher up, then you just pay a penalty and initiative for each one that you've skipped over. So also, again, another sort of elegant solution to, you can pick the thing that you really want off the orders track, but it's going to cost you. And, that could throw off how your responses go. If somebody gets to go ahead of you and, attack or withdraw before you're ready to spring your big plan, that's just how it's going to go. So the strategic warfare track, again, I already explained those a little bit. The Allies have the capability to flip some of their orders. If they don't want to do, if you don't want to do one of those move orders or attack orders or something, you can flip it over and use it as a strategic warfare action instead, which gives you the option to roll dice on these tracks and try and influence the strategic war. So as you can see, I've already won the Siege of Malta with the Allies. Now I've been focusing on the Battle of the Atlantic. Likewise, I can also focus on the strategic bombing. And you see each of these tracks has a red hex under it, so that's going to give you, as the Allies, control of that if you are able to, quote-unquote, win that particular strategic war on the track. And to do that, to get to the advantage, you have to get it into those green spaces over there. Otherwise, the Germans are still in control. So you can see both of these have a ways to go. However, on the strategic bombing track, what you'll get as the Allies get more and more successful, you can see those plane markers on there. You'll take those off and replace the non-elite allied planes in the force pool with elite allied planes, meaning that your air power is going to get better the more work you do on the strategic bombing track. Because you can see right now, the Allies have 2 standard planes and an elite plane there, as well as the 1 standard plane that's on the map. Those will start to swap out as you devote more and more resources to the strategic bombing. So that is the sort of just a quick summary of how the game works. Again, this initiative track thing is really interesting because if you spend, if you do a recruiting, you can see the mechanized there costs 15 spaces on the initiative track. Whereas if you do, if you move various units just 3 spaces, that only costs 2. So you could do, a couple of those types of things in a row. You can see I've done the 4 and the 3 already. That only costs 5 initiative, as opposed to a single doing just adding 2 armor steps to your existing forces costs 15. So if you're doing a lot of recruiting, you're not going to get your opponents are going to get to go a lot while you're trying to beef up your forces. So that can have a negative impact on how things are going for you. Again, I think the Germans, the OKH faction, has created a fairly strong line on the East Front. The Soviets attacked a lot. One of the strategies that I read about was for the Soviets just to attack as much as they could to remove German strength points and units, just because the Germans cannot and will not be able to replenish their strength points as rapidly or as much as the Soviets. And when units are eliminated in this game, when you take away the last pip off of a unit, they're gone forever. They're not coming back. So, you can see here, OKH has already lost 2 elite units out there, which is pretty devastating because elite units, are one of the things that the Germans can use to try and hold out a little bit longer because it gives them DRM or gives them strength advantages over their opponents. And the Soviets currently don't have very many elite units out there. They'll get some more as the game goes on. I don't think there's any over there. They do have shock units, which also give you a boost, but they're not as strong as potential elite guard units. But they'll get more as the game goes on, but the Germans are not going to get very many more, certainly not as many more as the Soviets. So any losses at all for the Germans are basically bad and irreplaceable. So one of the strategies for the game posits that, if you just attack in the early stages of the game, the Germans are just going to collapse, and then the Soviets can sweep to victory. We'll see how that goes. My feeling so far on trying that with doing a lot of attacks with the Soviets, even if the odds weren't particularly good, even if I was only on, the +1 column, in some cases with a negative DRM, it usually turned out badly for the Soviets, where they would lose steps and the Germans wouldn't lose anything. So I don't know. My experience so far has been that you don't want to attack unless you've got, you're into the 2, 3, or 4 column plus column at least on the combat table. And then you definitely want to try and maximize your DRM as well. But because it can get, if you roll low especially, it can be bad attacking without having much, at too close to even odds or less than even odds. You roll low, it's going to be disastrous, because while defenders can split their losses between taking strength point losses and hexes of retreat, attackers can't retreat at all. They can't do that. So it's all going to be strength point losses for the attackers, which for the Soviets, who don't have the intrinsic strength point bonuses that the Germans do in terms of quality of units, it makes it hard for them to get overwhelming odds on the attack, especially when the weather's bad. And the weather's bad for most of the entire first couple turns of the game, where you can see it's all snow there for the entire first turn of the game, which is pretty rough. Mud is, to a certain extent, even worse because the DRM for mud is -3. So if you're attacking in mud, you're almost always rolling at a negative DRM. Even if you've got, a high, like, oh, you're on the 2 or 3 column, that's good, but you're still a -3 DRM, so you can end up rolling low on those, even those beneficial columns, and that's still bad for the attacker. So yeah, we'll see how the Germans do. Again, you can play very ahistorically, obviously, in this because you don't have Hitler saying, no, you can't retreat. You can retreat as much as you want, and the smart player will do that, like fall way back and then try and pad their strength points so that you can create a fully strength, or fully strengthened, full strength units defensive line for the Germans, while the Soviets have to race to try and get up there, while their units are not quite as strong as the Germans. And that can expose them to counterattacks, which I've done in a couple of cases with the Germans. Some have gone well and some haven't, but I think it's a strategy that's, I think, working so far for the Germans. But, again, we're still very early in the game, and it can start to collapse very quickly for the Germans once things start to go against them, especially as they start to run out of units the more the game goes on. And then once the Allies open the second front on the continent, I'm not sure if I'm going to bother with Italy or if I'm just going to go right to Overlord. We'll see. I'll take a look at the strength that the Western Allies are able to muster once their units are actually able to get on the map. And then also that's going to see how well the North Atlantic War goes, strategic war goes, in order to be able to move units across those sea zones without taking losses. So anyway, we'll see how it goes. But so far I am really enjoying it. I mean, it's obviously, it's not Advanced Third Reich, or it's not World in Flames, or in terms of other monster treatments, it's not a World at War, but it is a nice strategic treatment of the Second World War that uses a really innovative and, frankly, fun system to make a intriguing and engaging game out of the conflict. So to that extent, I'm certainly enjoying it, and it plays pretty quickly once you get everything down. All of the interconnected pieces. Once you get it all down, it's not difficult. The rules are very well written. No real ambiguities or difficulties in terms of understanding the rules so far. So if you're at all interested in a 2-player, it's not the kind of game that plays so quickly you could play it in an evening. You might be able to play the campaign if you devoted like a full day to it. But it probably would take you, 2 or 3 sessions, I would guess, at least, to play it, at least far enough where you would know that, hey, that's, there's no way the one side or the other can win. But again, it plays quickly, especially once you're used to it. Once you've figured out what all the different orders are, and you start getting used to, what works best when, once you get used to the cycling through the event cards and all that, it plays pretty quickly. And I can definitely recommend checking it out if you're at all interested in strategic World War II. And in particular, if you want to, potentially introduce somebody else to a strategic World War II game, this would probably be a good place to start, because it's deep enough that you can really sink your teeth into it, but it's not overwhelming at the level of a World in Flames or World at War type game. You can there's enough strategy and crunchiness to what you're doing with combat and the orders and the initiative and the events and all that kind of stuff. That there's a lot of depth and interest there that's not overwhelming, so that newer players could play it without being completely like, oh, I don't want to do something that's practically forcing me to look at spreadsheets. So I think in that regard, it's definitely worth looking into if you're at all interested in the subject.